Hey everyone, in this video we're going to come back to Latin verbs and think about how do we use the perfect tense in Latin. And to really answer this question, we want to think about how do we put Latin verbs in the past, right? Which is a question we asked in a previous video, but it's an important one because there's a couple different ways to do it. So before we dive too far in, we just want to make sure, again, I know I keep repeating this, but it's important that you understand what a verb is, right? That's the basic idea. You really can't go forward with tenses until you are feeling confident in what a verb actually is. It's an action word, right? Running, jumping, skipping, typing, launching, whatever it is you want to look at or say, these are all verbs, action words, okay? And we said Latin verbs have three different elements to them. They have tense, mood, and voice. In this video, we're keeping with the theme of tense, right? The past few videos have all been on different tenses. So we want to make sure that we understand what a tense actually is. And if you want to get a quick look at that, I would highly recommend you go back to one of the first videos I made on what is a tense. It just gives you a quick overview of what they are, how they relate to each other, and it'll give you a little sense of what the timing is for Latin verbs and kind of how we can change the time. In this particular video, we're looking at the perfect tense, okay? So it'll explain it in this video on what a tense is. It'll show you what the perfect tense is, but I'll repeat it here too, just so you get a good sense of it. So let's get started. Okay, where do we start? Well, we got to get a basic understanding of what the perfect tense is, or at least refresh our memory if you've seen that video before. So again, we're talking about actions in the past. So one example is to think about how did you get to school this morning? There's two ways you can say it. You can say I was walking to school or I walked to school. Okay, the difference is sort of like the difference between a snapshot, a photo, and a video. And if you watch my video on the imperfect tense, you'd remember that we said the imperfect tense is like the video. I was walking. It means that it's not really a completed action. Like, yes, you did complete the idea of walking to school. But when you say it like that, I was walking, you're really setting up to show this action in the past over a period of time. You know, and you might say something like, wow, I was walking, I tripped and fell. Okay, so you're kind of, when you use the imperfect tense, you're trying to show something happening in the past over that stretch of time. Again, that continuous or repeated action. The snapshot or the photo, I walked, is called the perfect tense, right? Perfect in Latin, perfectus means completed, right? So imperfect means a not completed action. And perfect, perfectus means a completed action, meaning, it had a starting point, it had an end point, and it was done, right? I walked to school. Got it. So it is a minor difference, and maybe in English we don't make a big enough distinction between this, but in Latin there is a distinction between the two, right? They're spelled differently, they look different, and they really do express two different ideas, right? And there are certain times when you use imperfect and certain when you use perfect. And again, the perfect tense is really about that completed past action. Okay, and we translate it pretty much how you would do just sort of general past tense in English. So if you can think of, what the past tense of your verb is, that's really what perfect will be. So for instance, if I was looking at the verb to walk, I would say I walked for perfect tense, right? I wouldn't say I was walking, that would be imperfect, but just I walked. So usually it's that ed ending. I walked, I jumped, I skipped. Right? That's pretty common, but it could also be something else, right? You wouldn't say I run, you'd say I ran. And you wouldn't say I falled, you'd say I fell. So try to think of how we just in general put English verbs into the past tense, and that's really what your perfect tense translation is going to be, okay? So now we need to dive into how we form it, right? And to start, again, we want to think about the principal parts of a verb. So you've seen this slide before. Verbs have four pieces, okay? So for the first couple of videos I made on tense, we talked about present, imperfect, and future, right? These are what we call the present system, okay? So those three tenses all started with the first two parts, audio and audire in this example. They really hinged on the infinitive, the second principal part, okay? The perfect tense does not use those pieces. So this is the first verb, the first tense rather, where we're using a different piece, a different principal part, if you will, which is why we didn't include perfect with present and imperfect, okay? This is sometimes called the perfect system. So the perfect tense, the pluperfect, and the future perfect, right, which we're going to do in the next three videos, they all start with the third principal part, or the fourth, depending on what you're really doing here, right? But they really all hinge on that third principal part of audivi. So we have a different starting place. So one way to think of it is when we're forming the perfect tense, we only need that third principal part, right? The other ones really don't matter. And remember, the third principal part is the perfect tense, first person singular. So in other words, audivi means I heard. So it's already perfect tense, which makes sense, right, of why we're starting here, okay? So if we simplify this verb down, audio, audire, we can really just form it down to that third principal part, audivi. That's all we really need. Okay? So step one is to go to that third principal part and drop the long I. Okay? This is what we call the perfect stem. So if I took audivi, the third principal part of audire, and I get rid of that final I, the long I have audiu as my stem. Okay? Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to really move into the perfect tense endings. But before we do that, you just want to look at that third principal part, right? Our starting point. It's actually pretty easy to do perfect tense in Latin because you're given that third principal part, right? The starting point is already there. You don't really have to do anything. There's no vowel flips. It's given to you. So they do follow a general pattern, right? You're going to see like, for instance, first conjugation verbs using that AVI, right? Awi, ending or sort of middle point when you're dealing with perfect tense. But they can also be pretty unique, right? They might not be exactly what you were thinking it would be. So, for instance, dico, right? When you say dixi, right? The X is kind of a little odd at first when you see it. So this is why they're given to you in the principal parts. We list that third principal part because sometimes the spelling really isn't something you were expecting. But the good news for you is if you pick up a Latin dictionary, you always know how to spell the perfect tense because that third principal part is given to you, right? You don't have to guess. You don't have to do any vowel flips, anything. Just take that third principal part, drop the long I, right? They're all going to have a long I there. You drop it, and now you have the stem you need. That's the whole idea. Okay. The other piece of good news, when you're doing perfect tense, conjugation doesn't matter, right? The group of your verb, it makes no difference, right? So you don't have to even think, is it first? Is it second? Is it third I or fourth? You don't have to worry about that. Just take the third principal part, drop the long I, and you have exactly what you need, right? So it makes perfect tense a lot easier in some ways. So again, step one, go to the third principal part, drop the long I. So here, if I had audivi, I would have audiu, right? And now I'm ready to go. But now I have to add my endings. The trick is we're not using those present tense endings anymore, the personal verb endings you've been used to, like ost, must, sunt. That's not what we've got anymore. Now we have perfect tense endings, right? So a different group of endings. It goes isti, it, imus, istis, erunt, okay? And that represents I, you, he, she, it, we, you all, and they. Okay. But once you memorize these, and again, it's just straight memorization. These are the endings every single time. It never changes. There's no vowel flips. Just take your third principal part, drop the long I, add these, and you're off and running. That's all you have to do. So if I took audiu again, right? So from audivi, right? The audire, the verb to hear, I would take my stem, add on isti, imus, istis, erunt, and I'm ready to go. That's it. Right? So I get audivi, which means I heard, audivisti, which means you heard, and audivit, which means he, she, or it heard. Then I add on imus, istis, erunt, and I have we, you, all, and they. Right? That's all it is. No, nothing too crazy here. It's pretty straightforward, right? So usually my students do pretty well with perfect tense. It's different because you have to go to the third principal part, but once you get past that first hurdle, it's the same endings every single time. So it's actually a lot easier for them. So hopefully it will be for you too. So let's take a look at some examples, right? Now that we've seen it, let's put it into action. Here's an example of a first conjugation verb, right? Ambulo, ambulare. Again, the only piece I need is the third piece. Ambulavi is my third principal part. I drop the long I, bring down my stem, ambulav, right? And I add on isti, imus, istis, erunt. That's it. I walked, you walked, he, she, it walked, and down the line. That's all you have to do. Here's a second conjugation verb. Right? Sedeo, sedere. My third principal part is sedi. Take the long I off, add my endings. I get sedi, sedisti, sedit, and down the line. Right? I sat, you sat, he, she, it sat. Very straightforward. Here's the third conjugation verb, right? Ascendere. The third principal part is ascendi. Drop the long I, add your endings, and you're off and running. Okay? Here's the third io. Again, same process. It's going to be very repetitive. Go to the third principal part, drop the long I, add your endings, and you're all set. Here's an example of a fourth conjugation, right? Skio, skire, to know. Skiwi, third principal part, drop the long I, add your endings, and you're saying I knew, you knew, he, she, it knew, and down the line. Okay? So again, it's pretty straightforward. And again, I like to put this sort of infographic up. If you want to pause the video, feel free. This is something I give my students just to break it all down into the steps and make sure they're good. So if you can see it, hopefully you can. Pause the video, take a screenshot, whatever you need, doesn't matter to me. If you want this, feel free to ask in the comments. I'll happily give it to you. Not a major deal, but this kind of breaks the steps down of how you do perfect tense conjugation. But again, it's really straightforward. It's just a couple little steps and a new set of endings. That's it. Third principal part, add your endings, and you're good. So perfect tense is actually pretty straightforward. If you want a pro tip, again, my buddy High Paws here, not that I know him, right? I'm just a fan of his YouTube videos. He has another one where he does perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect tense. So obviously pluperfect and future perfect, we're not there yet. We'll cover those in another video, but he does go over perfect tense for you with a ridiculous song and dance. Have fun with it. It's just a nice way to help you memorize this. Again, anytime you can set it to music or dancing or whatever, it'll just help you out. Go for it. The bonus pro tip, Magistrula. Go to Magistrula, set yourself up with the charts, right? Just do as many of these as you can. You can set Magistrula to only do perfect tense, and you can get mass repetitions over and over and over again. You spend 10 minutes on Magistrula, you're going to be an expert on perfect tense. You will be all set. There's not a lot to it, okay? So go do Magistrula. Here's a quick recap of what we just did, right? Bring it all together. Again, perfect tense represents completed past action. To form it, you go to the third principal part, and you drop the long I, and you just add your endings. That's it. Translate it like normal past tense in English. Usually it's ed, like walked, but it could be different. That's all it is to there is to it. It's very straightforward. So practice this. Go over it a few times. Get as much repetition as you can, and you should be all set. Good luck.